All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Sufchek, and I'm the Managing Director of Marketing Services here at Verndale. Thank you so much for attending today. The team's exciting to share their thoughts on how structured taxonomy can really act as the foundation for things like dynamic content, personalization, and AI-driven experiences. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. We've got our cameras on. You can turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable. We want this to be an interactive session. Please post questions in the chat as we go, and the deck that is going to be shared will be shared with you after the fact. So I'm going to turn it over to Dawn to go ahead and get started introducing herself as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Todd. Hi, everyone. My name is Dawn Bovasso, and I am the VP of Content and the Content Strategy Practice Lead. And that means that I also lead the taxonomy practice. So my background is that I started as a librarian and a career taxonomist. And people always ask me how I became a taxonomist. So back in the early 2000s, when I was going to library school, and my family was kind of teasing me about spending my whole career reading books, my dad gave me some really great advice. And he said, when you're in school, look at something that is going to be very important and in demand 4 years from now, right? And that was such great advice, I think, and even very applicable right now. But that was just when libraries were starting to bring all of their catalogs online. And I saw this really great niche for figuring out how to classify all of that, right? And that was when taxonomy was really becoming digital. And I fell in love with it and saw how that was going to apply to online and e-commerce and really started creating that niche. And then as I moved into the agency world, applied that and ended up doing my master's and PhD in library and information science. And now here we are, right? Moving it into all kinds of spaces that we never even imagined could exist now. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Steph, over to you.
Thanks, Dawn. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Saia. I am the practice lead for web personalization and experimentation. Prior to Verndale, I was in shoes similar to many of you on the client side. I spent the past 20-ish years working in the healthcare, health tech, and technology industries, really in roles focused on managing website transformation projects and directing teams who were focused on making the websites as highly performant as possible, whether that meant lead generation or actual e-commerce related sales. Through my roles there, I was very focused in the experimentation space and heavy up on A/B testing. And of course, as personalization has emerged in more recent years, have also sharpened my focus there as well. So definitely look forward to talking with you all today about how taxonomy can set up personalization programs for success. And with that, I will pass over to Andres.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. My name is Andres Hernandez. I'm a technical architect at Verndale, and I've been working on software development for over 20 years. I'm typically involved in designing and implementing solutions for enterprise CMS platforms such as Optimizely. Many of the projects I've worked on have included features like related to search and also content personalization. This may seem straightforward at first, but creating strong user experiences around them often requires a thoughtful solution design and also close collaboration across teams, right? And over time, I've come to believe that well-structured content taxonomy and tagging architectures as well are critical when building features like for search and personalization. Okay? So hopefully our team will be helping you understand why. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad to answer any questions if there are any. Okay, so welcome.
Right. Thanks. Okay, so for our agenda today, holistically, we want to just give you a sense of what you need to know about taxonomy, how you can plan for it, and what it can really help you accomplish both now and as technologies and innovations emerge into the long term. So again, as Todd said, you can feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about how taxonomy powers everything in our digital ecosystems, right? From dynamic content delivery, as we talked about, to personalization, to now's the conversation is all centered around AI. Taxonomy has been for a long time the underpinning of all of this, right? And if like we look back to what I was just talking about with how it started off as when libraries were first coming online, that was right when the internet and e-commerce really started to become a thing, right? And if you remember back when Amazon and Zappos first came online and we had all of those filters first starting, right? That was really when the first taxonomies really started to become developed in a very robust way, right? And that was when our craft really started becoming defined, right? That was when my job really became a capability as it is today, right? Someone actually had to go in and say, yes, we need a category for color. We need a category for heel height. We need a category for material type so that you can find the type of shoes that are right for you, right? And all of a sudden that started scaling across all of our products, right? Anything that we wanted to buy. Okay. Okay. So before we go too much further, I always like to have a conversation so that we're on the same page about nomenclature. Okay. And I'm sure if any of you have done any kind of taxonomy work, people use a lot of these words interchangeably, right? Sometimes when people say taxonomy, they're talking about the navigation. And sometimes when they say taxonomy, they're talking about a spreadsheet of just keywords. Okay. So even when people have a lot of knowledge, I just like to make sure we're all using the same words in the same way. Okay. So for the sake of this conversation, when we say taxonomy, okay, and this is absolutely, I will like die on this sword, taxonomy refers to the parent-child relationships, okay, between these categorizations. Okay, so we're going to use apples as an example here. So it is about the relationships between the apples, produce. You drill down, it is about how the fruit and apples relate to each other, right? It is establishing these relationships amongst each other. Okay, that is what a taxonomy is. If you were a grocery store and I was creating your taxonomy, I would set up all of the relationships of the items in your store. Okay. We would also come in and figure out what does your navigation look like? How do people move around the store, right? That is the navigation, right? The sitemap, which we have started at Verndale doing separately from the navigation, is just the complete list. It's your inventory, like how many apples do you have? Where do they live, right? Where are they stored? Because that can be completely separate from the navigation, right? We just need to know where they are, how many we have, right? How are they stored? What are the URLs? Okay. And then the merchandising, which is essentially the design. What does it look like? How do we want it to be experienced when someone walks in? How are they feeling, right? How do we get the apples to them, right? And all of that together is the term information architecture, right? Put it all together, right? And Steph, how does personalization fit into this?
Yeah, so building on what Dawn just said, if you look at taxonomy through a personalization lens, what we're talking about with web personalization is realistically tailoring digital experiences to be relevant to an individual user based on who we understand them to be, the job they're trying to perform on the website, and kind of where they are in that digital journey. And so the type of structure that Dawn was just outlining is what allows us to take what would be a static digital experience and move it to a dynamic one. So I'll go back to her apples example. So for example, the taxonomy is telling us not just that something is produce, but it's literally drilling down to the level of fruit, apple, and then all the way down to Honeycrisp versus a Granny Smith. So if we get to that level of granularity, that's where that level of detail that's being captured will allow us to, from a personalization perspective, respond to that user behavior in a much more meaningful and relevant way. So, if we know, for example, that they're viewing information on Honeycrisp apples, what does that mean in terms of what we're going to show them next? If we wanted to present content to make them more likely to buy, we're going to try to show them relevant examples that either are Honeycrisp apples or what we've classified to be similar in taste to the Honeycrisp apple. And so that's where we can really start to tailor that experience. We'll get to some richer examples that go beyond apples in just a minute, but I will pass it to Andres to highlight the technical aspects as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Stephanie. So there are a lot of considerations in order to build this kind of things, but probably something that's very important to highlight is that implementation may vary depending on the underlying platforms and technologies that we're using, right? But if we try to keep it as simple as possible, essentially we need to get these, let's say, specs from content strategy or digital marketing, right? We need to build these categories into a content management system. And we need to be able to use these categories to label content within that system. Okay, so those are kind of like the essential steps that we need to think about when we're building these features. Okay, so once again, we will get in a more depth examples shortly, but hopefully this helps to understand what are the roles from, let's say, a design perspective and a strategic perspective, and finally from a technology perspective as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it pulls it all together. Okay, let's look at a fun example of a taxonomy. I wanted to give, right from the outset, an example of what a really robust taxonomy looks like and how we would use it and why, right? So this is one of my favorite examples to use because I think most of us are familiar with this content, right? So um, let's say we're talking about Taylor Swift and we wanted to do a taxonomy that tried to really create a map of how all of these relationships are connected, right? Now, I sort of challenge you to maybe take a screenshot of this because one of the questions that I get a lot now, of course, is related to AI, right? And it's sort of a chicken and the egg question. Can AI create taxonomies? And how is taxonomy related to AI? And if you look at this, look at how from this example here, we can see what is the relationship between Taylor Swift and Blake Lively, right? And if you know anything about them, you know that they are best friends, right? Or they have been best friends for a really long time. And in a really good, thorough taxonomy done by someone who is knowledgeable about the subject, the taxonomy captures that, right? It captures that they have both been directors, they have both been actors, and that they have a very deep friendship, right? And the taxonomy creates that map, right? And then when you have this full taxonomy in place that captures all of the relationships and you feed it into your system, then when you go to have your platform or system use the taxonomy as a map, right? And you serve up the dynamic content and you do the search, it knows that those two things are related, right? So say you're a People magazine or you're any type of news outlet and someone is reading an article on Taylor Swift, you know to serve up an article that might also be about Blake Lively, right? You can associate those two things together. Okay. So after I created this example, I went into Chat GPT and I said, oh, make me a Taylor Swift taxonomy, right? And it was meh, right? It was not great. And the reason for that is because The taxonomy comes first, okay? Things like ChatGPT and other AI systems use taxonomies as their source of truth, as the information that is fed to it in order to do their job, right? You have to feed in the information in order for them to be smart, right? And that is really important. And that's something that I want us to think about as we continue on this conversation, right? Like the LLMs, all of them need something to crawl in order to give us the information back that we're expecting. And as they get more powerful, they're going to need more powerful structured data, right? Okay. Let's keep going. I think that's it. Andres or Steph, did you have anything you wanted to chime in on this one? No. Okay. All right. So here's another example from a fast casual restaurant, a client of ours that I worked on. And there's a couple things that I wanted to point out here. So first, this doesn't look as fun as the Taylor Swift example that I did, right? Because in real life, when I work on one of these with a client, I can't map it out like I did with the Taylor Swift one. It would take a million hours, right? We have to do it in something a little bit more effective and fast, like Word or Excel. There's no right or wrong way. You just have to do it in a way that captures all of your notes and that you can hand that off to the tech team when it comes to building it. So in reality, when I do it, it's a little messy. It has a million colors and fonts and stuff so that we can build it in the way that we need to. What you'll see here is on the left where it says for the dam, and then we have for the dam and the site in the middle, and then the metadata on the right. This is super interesting because I know nowadays, a lot of you are doing dam implementations at the same time that you're doing a full site redesign and replatforming, okay? And this is really important because it's really effective to do it in one fell swoop, right? Because your content and your assets and in your PIM, your products in your PIM almost always have a large chunk of overlapping data and content that is the same, right? So for example, this is food. This is fast casual food. Let's take mac and cheese as our example. Let's say you have a photo of mac and cheese that is going to go on the site, right? You would want to tag it from the left with whatever color that photo is. So say it's orange or maybe golden brown, right? You would also want to tag it how you're using it, maybe for marketing, maybe in the restaurant, maybe in retail if they're selling it in their store, right? You want to tag it from the mealtime and obviously mac and cheese, maybe bacon mac and cheese. It also have all this metadata attached to it, right? So you really want to have one taxonomy that can be pushed out and used for all of your systems, your dam and your site, your PIM if you have it, so that it can all aggregate together and work with all of your content, right? One taxonomy to rule them all. Okay. And here's a great example, I think that most of us can relate to, right? It's one of the original implementers of a taxonomy, Netflix, where they have all of their images in their dam. They have a obviously very robust site full of categories, full of personalization, and then obviously a PIM with all of their movies and products and stuff in it. And then if any of you have used it, you know that they are pushing out all types of stuff across all three, right? And then, Steph, I love if you could chat a little bit about how that all works together for
Absolutely.
personalization.
Yeah. So I think where personalization has the potential to really become powerful is when you're able to combine user data with a
Mhm.
strong taxonomy at the foundation. So if we continue on the Netflix example here, Netflix is not just reacting to the user's behavior in terms of what they've watched in the past. they're layering in other information such as behavioral signals. So, kind of what the user has clicked on and what does that tell us? Content relationships, which Don has just reviewed, and then that underlying taxonomy on a broader level where they have curated content by tagging it with things like genre or theme or viewing preferences based on the individual. And that helps them deliver recommendations that realistically, when we all log into Netflix, feel as if they were built specifically for you. And when you have that level of personalization, there is a delicate balancing act. So you want the personalization to make the content feel helpful and relevant while also not becoming overly intrusive. So that's, part of the art and science behind that delicate balancing act. And I will pass to Andres to fill us in a little bit about what this means for personalization and search.
Definitely. So, personalization in search are kind of like the most important features that you will find in modern websites, right? And the thing is that there are multiple kinds of personalization. Can be one-to-many personalization, could be one-to-one personalization. So there are different scopes that you need to consider. And the thing is that depending on what you're trying to achieve, you may need to track different kind of data, and you may need to apply different kind of content tagging strategies in order to achieve these kind of goals. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is that if you're trying to, let's say, answer questions based on user intent or preferences, right? You might as well think about how you need to design this taxonomy so that you can answer those questions. If for some reason you cannot respond to those questions, it's very likely that the taxonomy structure is actually not being implemented in the right way because we're unable to match those preferences to existing content items, right? So it's all about leveraging existing relationships, as Don mentioned before. And we're trying to deliver that kind of information based on matching this content tags versus the intent, okay, or preferences. So that's kind of like how it works. And I know that shortly we will go into the specifics on the technical part, and I'll tell you about what are like the steps that we need to perform in order to build taxonomies, also the search functionality, and also enable the personalization scenarios that Stephanie mentioned a moment
Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions so far or anything that they want us to elaborate on? No? Okay, great. One thing to note too about this Netflix example is, I mean, back before we actually had all of these cookies and user data, Netflix was doing an incredible job of making it feel personal before it was personalized, right? And I think that's one of the real benefits of taxonomy too, is you can use all of these tags and categories and classification to make it feel personal, right? So even if you look at this example here, I mean, obviously I watch a lot of Christmas romance, right? You can create collections like this without knowing anything about the person, right? You just create collection after collection after collection, and eventually one of them will stick, right, with the user. And that's an example of what's happening here, right? We have a client who's a travel client, and right now we're creating this taxonomy with a category called experiences, right? And these are based on just general collections that are not powered by user data, but are just grouping together all of their travel options, right? That a user without any data just might be interested in, right? Things that are interesting and fun, right? And they can be served up in all of these different and fun ways through the navigation, right? And this is where I was talking about where the navigation does not necessarily match the taxonomy, right? So you can see here on the left, a little snippet of what's in the taxonomy. So for example, iconic destinations is the parent, and we're going to have a couple of children of different types of iconic destination categories and collections. So, national parks is a huge thing, right? I have a couple friends who are trying to hit up every national park there is, right? That is a bucket list item for a lot of people. And then you can see here as we're designing out the mega nav flyout, they get to decide, okay, which 6 to 10 collections do they want to highlight in the nav flyout. And they can pick from literally anything in the taxonomy because all it does is do a call for that tag, right? It doesn't matter what the user data is, doesn't matter if they know anything about you. It's just pulling all of the tags and it allows for that, sort of spontaneous discovery, right? So for all of you, if your phase one of your project is making it feel personal without personalization, you can do that. You set up your taxonomy. Um, Okay, I see a question here. How can the taxonomy impact SEO, right? And what considerations should you have to make sure it's visible in search? Okay, great questions. Let me take those separately. So in terms of the SEO, a couple different things. One is when we do the taxonomy, it does take the category and dump that into the metadata, right? The same as it always has. So that is actually really great. Um, that has not changed over the years. What has changed is that with the LLMs and AIO and AI search is the taxonomy helps the LLMs understand how all of the categories are related to each other, right? With the cross-linking and the relationships. And that is great for the new types of search that are emerging, right? Andres, did you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, definitely. So if you are looking this from an implementation standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
usually taxonomies are landed in structured data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you will find like a specific structured data nodes that are going to be included as part of the content of the that we're serving, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
good news is that that can inform LLMs and other kind of platforms. What are those relationships and hierarchies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, essentially, if you're looking this from an SEO standpoint, is that we're providing additional context that's going to help you understand those relationships.
Yep. Great. Matthew, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that's external search, what we were just talking about. There's also internal search, right? Which is really important. So when you have a really great taxonomy, what it does is allows for all different types of features and functionality in internal search, right? So you can do things like the predictive search, where if you, for example, let's use this one as our use case. So culinary journeys is a great example. If you're on this site now and you go into their search and you type culinary, then the search knows that that is something that we have a collection of, right? So that would pop up. You could perhaps bold it and then go to that collection, right? And it's already pre-curated for you, right? You can prioritize that. So it allows us to give more robust results, more prioritized results, and to know that that's what the user is more likely looking for. Right. Fabulous. Okay.
If we could for a minute, Dawn, I
Yeah,
just
sure.
wanted to kind of
Yeah.
jump in to layer in kind of how this factors into personalization. So, Dawn just went through some great examples using this travel client and the types of, tagging that's happening behind the scenes to classify these trips. So if we think about having that type of a well-defined taxonomy in place at the foundation from the start, that's what's going to help to make your personalization scalable. And it's also going to help with speed to market. So if we think about what is being presented here, we have trips that are already tagged according to the theme, the destination, and the type of traveler. And what that does is that structure allows your marketing team to immediately begin to layer in behavioral data, such as what a user is clicking on as they're browsing through your website. And that's going to help the site become more intelligent about what it should be dynamically prioritizing to serve up the most relevant trips for you. If you don't have a foundation like that in place, but you're looking to personalize, I'm just going to flag, going to need to take some time up front to, get some of the fundamentals set up before you can launch personalization into market. So you would need to sort of then take a step back, go back into the CMS, define the taxonomy, apply the tags to your content, similar to what you see here on this slide, and ensure that that's being done in a consistent manner across the content on the site. And, that can be a significant investment in terms of time and effort. So just something to be mindful of, because you don't want to be ready to launch a personalization program and then be bogged down from a time to market standpoint by having to go back and do create the foundation first. There are, some exceptions in terms of where you can get some quick wins, which I'll let Andres talk through next.
Yeah, definitely. Adding to the personalization use case, right? So from a technical standpoint, we're trying to understand those behaviors, meaning that we know that visitors are going into specific pages. So using the national parks example, right? If someone goes to a Yosemite page, right? And we know that Yosemite is basically related to national parks. What we could do is we could use that category, the content category, right, from that page, and we could infer that probably they will be interested in additional national parks. So the next time they visit the website, we could pull out Yellowstone, for instance, right? And that way we can use these, let's say, high-level categories in order to determine that kind of behavior, right? And the things that we could recommend. So bucketing down content into this, let's say, different kinds of scopes, right? We're using currently national parks, but there could be other scopes. And based on this journey, we can get those insights and then we can start recommending content. So yeah, it's not that difficult if you see it this way, right? It's all about understanding the visitor journey through our channels, right? Ensuring that we understand that that content is actually mapped to specific categories. And then we can look into additional similar items that may be on the same path that the client's going. Okay?
Yeah, great.
Just one thing to add there. So just to sort of tie this slide, together before we move to the next. So basically, if you are looking to implement personalization, but you still do need some time to build or enhance your taxonomy, the quick wins that could be possible is personalizing based on the content type and things like the audience or the segment. And then you can look to enhance your personalization efforts further once you have that taxonomy fully in place. And typically when we work with clients on personalization projects, that's kind of compatible with the approach that we would take, because we like to use a model that goes through stages that we refer to as crawl, walk, run, and fly. And so with your crawl experiences, you're starting off with some more basic personalization. And then over time, as you see, how things are behaving in the system, how those initial pilot experiences are performing, then you can look to expand into some more sophisticated functionality over the course of time, as is appropriate for your organization.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, perfect. Any other questions from the listeners? No? Okay. Okay, so I do want to chat a little bit about what the process looks like Because to be honest with you, I could whip up your taxonomy very quickly, right? But it's only most of the time, but it's only a little piece of it. So let's chat a little bit about what would need to happen end to end to get all of this in place, right? So the very first thing that would happen, should you want to do this, is a taxonomist would sit down and actually what we do is we look at almost all of your content, right? We literally just read a large chunk of your website. We look at your photos, your assets, if you're including a dam, right? We just basically read it all. I mean, it's been fun. Like I've learned a lot of things. I once did a shoe website, not Zappos, a different one, and I learned a lot about like clown shoes and like costume, like they'd had like a lot of costume shoes, right? I had to become an expert on the parent-child relationships between like elf shoes and clown shoes and how that all worked, right? You have to become an expert on a lot of really random and funny topics, right? So the taxonomist has to learn all of your content and become an expert in it, right? So that is sort of the first thing that happens. Okay. And then the second thing we do is we ramp up on what you want to achieve. So the personalization is part of it, and everything that Steph talked about is one. So we bring in someone like her to really flush out your personalization, right? But there's other things too, like dynamic content delivery. And by that, I often mean things like related articles, right? Do you want to do that? If you're doing filtering, that is one of the most important things that we need to figure out because that can be simple or that can be incredibly complicated, right? The site search, like that we just talked about. Do you want to do predictive search? Do you want to do prioritized search, right? Anything like that. Of course, with AI now, what's on your AI wish list, right? Are you using an AI chatbot? Is there some type of on-site AI search that we need to take into account, right? Anything, or using an AI agent that we maybe need to take into consideration, right? So all of that, we need to get that whole wish list done to figure out how robust this taxonomy needs to be. The other thing that, quite frankly, tends to be complicated is actually internal site content actually tends to be a little more complicated than external site content. So if you have an intranet or something like that, those requirements tend to be really complex. So we need to like gather all of that too, right? So that's part two. So once we have all of that said and done, okay, then we actually really sit down and make this taxonomy, right? And this is actually not as complicated as it seems because, again, like I've done so many of these, I've probably done hundreds at this point in my career. A lot of the buckets are similar. Like Steph was saying, like we almost always have an audience bucket, right? We almost always have a content type bucket. We almost always have a topics bucket, right? A lot of these things are pretty consistent across all industries, across all digital experiences, right? This is actually the fastest part of the whole process. Okay. Then, how many people in your organization need to review it, right? And do they actually understand taxonomy? Um, it's funny, we had a client that I was warned would be a little tough, and they had two people say that they wanted to review it, and they were like, "Nope, we're good. We trust you." And I had scoped like a lot of hours, like 80, and it ended up taking 20 because they did not feel that they needed to review. They were like, nope, we're good. We trust you. If you have a lot of reviewers and a lot of rounds, right, this could go on, but otherwise, this can be actually the fastest part of the process, right? Um, Now, the fourth part, the requirements development, how is this different from number two? Okay. This is actually, once it's all done, me or the other taxonomist sits down with, for example, the business analyst and says, okay, we actually need to implement these filters. In terms of UX, if you literally click on this filter, Do we show 2 levels? Do we show 3 levels? Does it hyperlink? Does it show in a color? Like, how do we actually marry the UX with the taxonomy itself, right? Same thing with the search, right? Like when you type ahead, do we show the whole word? Do we bold it? Like what happens? Do we, Andres and I, which we get to a case study in a minute, but like, how do we prioritize the categories in the search, right? Things like that. We actually nail down those requirements. Okay. And get all of that. And that's actually in very close context with the UX designer too, usually. Team effort. Okay, and then the fifth part is, and Andres will talk about this in a minute in our case study, but how do we actually get this into your platform? Okay, so if you're using something like Sitecore or Opti, right? Do we just use out of the box? Do we have to do some customization, right? How do we get it in? Are we doing synonyms? Are we doing semantic relationships, right? What does it look like to actually get that implemented? All right. Questions, comments, anything to add, Steph or Andres, on that? No? Good.
Nope.
All right. All right, so I'm going to kind of chat through this checklist of whether or not you might need a taxonomy, some questions to ask yourself. If any of you have some real life examples that you might want to ask quickly, I can use as, some case study here. I'm happy to shout them out and see if we might have a yes or no answer as we go through this. All right, do you need a taxonomy? Okay. Does your digital experience need a taxonomy? Okay. First question you should ask yourself, how much content do you have, right? If your site has, 100 pieces of thought leadership and that's it, and the rest of it is just marketing copy, right? You don't have anything to relate to each other. There's not a lot of search content that would be dynamically connected to each other. You don't have products, right? You're just like a average size marketing copy, like your consulting service with a couple of pieces of thought leadership. You're not going to be personalizing anything, then maybe you don't, right? You're not going to really be dynamically driving anything and you don't have a lot of thought leadership. You're probably good, right? Um, are you planning any kind of enhanced search like filters, predictive search? Do you need to do an AI chatbot, right? Again, if the answer is no, or it's more than a couple of years out, right? Again, maybe you don't need to do this right now because the technology might be changing or your content might be changing, right? But if you have a lot of thought leadership, you have products, you know that AI is on your roadmap, right? And it's a directive to implement it, then as Steph and I were just talking about, then this is a really important foundation, right? To set for yourself, right? Need to lay it down so that it's ready for you. Okay. And then the last part is the personalization. And this is an easy yes or no. If you have personalization on your roadmap, then the answer is yes. That's it. Right? Because it's going to be near impossible to do your personalization without a taxonomy. That's it. We had a client, I had actually done the scoping and they were like a consultancy and they had not a lot of thought leadership and they said they weren't doing personalization. And so I was like, okay, you don't need a taxonomy. And then sure enough, towards the end of the design phase, they said we're doing personalization. And then I'm like, well, guess what? We've got to go back and do the change order for the taxonomy because how are you going to do the personalization, right? So that is an easy yes. All right, so these are the questions that you can ask yourself. All right. Any other questions, comments on that one? No? Okay. All right. So here are some tech things to keep in mind and just some logistics here. Just checking the time. Okay, we're good. Where will your taxonomy be built? Okay. Most of the time, the answer will be in your platform, right? So again, if you have Opti, Sitecore, another CMS, the answer is almost always there, and that is great. And you have some options. Andres can talk about this in a second, but you can either do the out of the box or your developers or our developers can customize that for you. If you need a little fancier, like the Taylor Swift example, right? That would be more custom functionality. Your third option is a third-party taxonomy manager. Okay. These can be a little bit more expensive, but they allow for really robust, deep taxonomies, right? So, for example, if you have tens of thousands of pages in your site across all different things, like a client that I did a giant hospital, okay, with thousands and thousands of pages of educational content, doctors and surgeons with all different types of specialties, right? Use this third party tool because they did this absolutely incredible thing where if you obviously, let's say you had brain cancer, right? What they wanted to do was be able to, in a really accurate way, connect all of the specialists who specialized in brain cancer with all of the educational content, with all of their research centers that were doing innovative work in brain cancer, right? And in just one fell swoop, make sure all of those things talked to each other, right? In a really accurate and discreet way. And it was absolutely very powerful and very accurate. And, that's where you would use a third party that could do that handshake with your platform, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Um, and then I think the last thing is who is going to do these? Do you have someone on your team that can determine all of these business rules, implement them, update the taxonomy, tag everything, right? Do the updates? Or do you need someone like us to come in, help you or do it? Right. Andres or Steph, was there anything you wanted to add on these in terms of readiness?
I don't think in terms of readiness, I
Yeah.
think just, the last point here in terms of tagging and governance, I think
Yeah.
the important thing that I like to keep in mind, just selfishly from a
Yeah.
personalization standpoint, is creating the taxonomy is one thing, but being
Mhm.
sure that it is being kind of carefully and thoughtfully maintained over
Mhm.
time is going to be the key to continuing to be able to deliver a more and more refined, personalized
Mhm.
experience to your users on the site.
Yeah.
So
Great.
Yeah, probably only one recommendation from my end. Try to get it right from the beginning.
Yeah.
To be honest, we know we can update it, but the thing is that we have encountered some situations in which we need to retag content. We need to move categories, right? In doing such a thing, sometimes end up in a very messy situation. So spend a lot of time trying to determine the right model that you need to apply so that you don't need to do rework afterwards.
Great. All right. Any questions or comments before we wrap up with a case study? Okay. All right. So pretty recently, we worked on the taxonomy for Johnson Financial Group. We love them. They're a super fun client, and they work really collaboratively with us on this taxonomy. So, what was interesting here is up at the top, you can see how they have the four really distinct audiences. And this is always a real challenge as a taxonomist because you have really different types of content. I know Steph loves this from a personalization point because what you don't want to do is have four sites, right? You want to have one site that feels cohesive, but you also want to make sure the content reaches the right people at the right time, right? So we had to make sure that the taxonomy reflected that. There's also going to be content that's right for everybody. So we wanted to make sure that was doing the lifting in the correct way too. So you can see we also have in the middle some space where there was these interactive modules that were really personalized. So you see, for example, in this screenshot, personal loans, home equity, but they also have drop downs for things like business and commercial. And then you have some more audience stuff below it. So there's all types of content delivery focus. Like you see on the right here, we have airline. These are industries that are happening. So it was a very interesting challenge to figure out how to get all of this to the right groups. So I worked on the taxonomy and then I passed it over to Andres to figure out how to make it happen in my vision, right? So, Andres, talk a little bit about how you brought this to life.
Yeah, I almost wanted to quit Verndale, to be honest.
It's our
No,
first
just kidding.
project together. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, just kidding. No, the thing is that essentially we get these specs, right? So usually content strategy is going to hand off like a content structure that we need to
Yeah,
replicate, right? Sometimes these content structures can be very, very complex. So we need to be
yeah,
mindful about loops, categories that may repeat on different places. So a lot of things to be careful about those things. It looks simple, but sometimes it can be very tricky. So once we get the hierarchy, there's a decision that we need to make. So as John mentioned before, depending the platform that you're using, you may have some out-of-the-box functionality that allows you to start building these
mhm,
category hierarchies, right? There's also options available that you can use existing plugins. This is the case, for instance, for Optimizely, site for WordPress as well. So you can install a plugin, and usually the plugin is going to provide you with some tools in order to manage these categories easily, right? So essentially, we start building the content tree, the category content tree. And once it's approved and once everything is validated, then we need to move on to the next part, right? Which is applying those category references to the actual content. Okay, so from a technical standpoint, what we do is depending on the content templates that you're using and the content items that have been created, we need to enable some metadata fields that will be used to host these references to the content category tree, right? So it's as simple as usually dragging and dropping these items. You can see if you check the presentation, so we have like an audiences input, we have content types, we have industries. So essentially what we do is we look into the content tree and we drag and drop and we put those references based on what applies to that content, right? And something that I want to highlight is that you need to be very disciplined regarding how you do this. If for some reason you have like a good start and you start applying very consciously these content tags, this will work very well. But if after some time you just stop caring about content tagging, then this is not going to work. So you need to be very disciplined regarding this. Okay. And once we have that in place, right? So once we have created the categories and we have enabled the metadata on the content, then we move on to the next step, which is actually enabling experiences based on these features, right? So it can either be search, faceted search usually, right? It could be content personalization, and there may be some additional use cases, for instance, navigation as well. Navigation is also powered by taxonomies, okay?
mhm.
So,
Well, theirs is not everybody's is, but theirs is some of theirs.
correct.
Yes, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So I'm going to speak briefly about these two implementations. So from a facet search perspective, so the thing is that we need to build that interface that Don mentioned before. So we need to gather with UX. We need to determine what the UX is going to look like. Are we putting in like multiple levels? Going to be like a single level? Are we going to prioritize items? Sometimes taxonomies are very, very thin, right? So we need to be mindful about priorities. So we need to build that interface, right? Then we need to move on to the logic, the search logic, because whenever we select a facet or we apply a filter, that needs to be translated into a search filter, right? And sometimes these search filters are kind of tricky as well. Sometimes these search functionality can get to be very, very complicated. And finally, we need to apply some prioritization on how we present results. So we may need to, let's say, put at the top of the list some content types that may be more relevant than others. We could use content personalization and behaviors in order to determine this. Depending on your intent, you may want to see something at the top versus some other content items. So yeah, that's kind of like it works. And finally, to enable personalization, we've already covered this before. So usually what we do is we apply two kinds of tracking, right? So the first one is related with behavioral tracking. We try to figure out and infer what are your interests based on the content that you visited in the associated categories. And afterwards, what we do is we design dynamic components that are going to pull in content based on similar categories, right? And there are multiple use cases. We could go all the way down. We can be very granular about what we want to present. But essentially, the concept is as simple as this. We map what you viewed. We try to extract the underlying concept. And then we try to find similar content using the same filters. Okay?
Perfect. I mean, that's the whole idea, right? Is it's all set up and then you work your magic on the back end to make sure it all talks to each other, right? All of the related pieces capture those relationships, right? So that's the intent. Okay. All right. So to sum up, here's what you should remember, right? If you take anything away from today, is that you should consider a taxonomy first and foremost if you want these 5 things, right? If your plan over the next year or two is that you need or want dynamically delivered content, like Andres just said, related content, any kind of fancy or robust search, right? Multiple systems that are talking to each other, PIMs, product catalogs, your DAM, right? Your ecosystem. And then, of course, with personalization and anything AI, if that is on your roadmap, then absolutely have the taxonomy in place. Okay. Any more questions or comments or final thoughts? While everybody thinks about their questions, if there are any, I want to remind everyone on this call that being here, you get to have a complimentary consult with any of us. So if you would like us to look at your taxonomy or your personalization plan, we are happy to. Okay. Oh, great. Kimberly, can you explain how synonyms should be accounted for in the taxonomy creation? Oh, I love that. I love synonyms. It's one of my favorite parts. Okay. How do they get factored into the Word docs? And how do we keep the management simple to make sure visitors don't? Oh, okay. Synonyms are actually easy. So, one of the things I do in the taxonomy creation is actually, let me go back to the example here and you can see, because I actually put them in, hold please. Let's go back to this one. Okay. You can actually see here some of the synonyms as the example. Do you see how dry goods has the brackets next to it? That is actually to indicate a synonym. So when I'm creating the taxonomy, it's a combination of recommending we use as the primary tag what we think users are most likely to search for, whatever your brand cares about the most. So, for example, dry goods was probably something that they felt very strongly about using, right? Maybe the brand has a POV on it. We also look at SEO data. What are people searching for the most, right? Is that a thing? Is there brand equity around it? If it's up in the air, sometimes we'll do what's called a nomenclature study, where we want a quick test to see if people prefer one term over the other. And then what we do is take the others and just make them synonyms. So they wouldn't necessarily show up on the user facing site in the collection or in the predictive search. But if someone searched groceries or searched packaged goods, they would get the same results as they would for dry goods. Okay? And that's how we handle the synonyms. Great. Thanks, Kimberly. Any other questions? I can stay on a minute if anyone else has any questions. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Again, you have all of our information in the email. So if you'd like a consult or are interested in doing some taxonomy or personalization work, please reach out. Happy to chat. We will be sending out the deck as a fast follow, and we would love to be in touch. So thank you so much for joining.